I'm Emma Debshar. I came here from Australia. I work at the Monash Center for Consciousness and Contemplative Studies, and I'm really happy to be here, especially in this minimal phenomenal experience track. So thanks so much to the organizers for making this event possible. So today I'm going to be talking about the use of the microphenomenological interview method for the study of minimal phenomenal experience. And in particular, I'm going to be looking at two ongoing studies in which we're using the microphenomenological interview to investigate mind blanking on the one side and cessation of consciousness in meditation on the other side. So these are two quite different phenomena that at the same time are both plausibly related to or lie somewhere in the vicinity of minimal phenomenal experience. And I want to start off by looking at some of the basics of the microphenomenological interview method, just so that we all know what we're talking about here. So this interview method was developed by Claire Petit-Maugeon, in close connection with the neurophenomenological research program. And its aim, broadly speaking, is to help participants, for instance, in a consciousness research study, to recall a past episode of their experience and then describe that episode with phenomenological precision. And some of the central tools that microphenomenology uses for doing that are the following ones. So one is evocation, which is a sort of a process of cultivated retrospection or cultivated remembering of a past experience. The second sort of aim or dimension that's important in microphenomenology is the redirection of participants' attention from the content, the what of experience, to the structure and dynamics or the how of experience. And then all of that is achieved importantly by using open-ended and non-leading questions. So here are some examples of such questions. The idea basically is that we try to help the participant become aware of and describe details of their experience that they may have not noticed in advance before the interview, but we try to do that by minimizing the introduction of any assumptions that we might have about their experience. So just to very briefly mention some of the research that has been already done with microphenomenology from this long list of phenomena that have been studied with it, I just want to point to two that are particularly relevant for the minimal phenomenal experience crowd. That's the self-boundary dissolution in meditation study led by Ohad Nave, and the objectless awareness during sleep study led by Adriana Alcaraz Sanchez. So with that in mind, I now want to turn to the main interest or question that's guiding my presentation today, which is, can microphenomenology be useful in providing detailed phenomenological descriptions of MPEs and related processes and states? So we're first going to look at a study of mind blanking, an ongoing study which we're currently carrying out. And to start with definitions, mind blanking can be quite broadly and inclusively defined as reports of reduced awareness and a temporary absence of thought or lack of memory for immediately past thought. So this broadly defined phenomena has recently gained quite a lot of traction within neuroscientists that are interested in its neural correlates. And I put these three studies from different research teams up here because they're quite representative, and also because they give us a nice opportunity to look at how differently mind blanking is operationalized in different research contexts. So here we can see for these three studies, the task the participants are asked to engage in ranges from intentionally trying to mind blank, so intentionally trying to think of nothing as best they can, to the resting state, to engaging in a boring task, such as the sustained attention to response task. In terms of reporting, even though these three studies are all using experience sampling, we can see that what they actually sample is quite different. So they either focus on when the mind was at, or on the content of the thoughts, the focus of the attention. So operationalizing mind blanking quite differently also at the response state. And then, most interestingly, perhaps, these different operationalizations, of course, correspond to quite different percentages of mind blanking that is acquired in this way. And this is a sort of a motivation for my phenomenological interest here. Because this situation sort of calls for some phenomenological grounding or phenomenological clarification of this phenomenon. So to do that, in our study, we're replicating the protocol by Andrion and colleagues that we saw on the previous slide as well. So we have participants engage in a SART task where they basically just looking at the screen and trying to press the button for every number that appears on the screen, apart from number 3. And during doing this boring thing, they are from time to time sampled. So their experience is sampled, and they're asked to report whether the focus of their attention was on task, off task, blank, or they don't remember it. The way that we modified the original protocol is by introducing short interviews following some of these probes, in which we then actually get to explore the reported experience a little bit further. And that gave us an opportunity to study a bunch of different experiential states that occur during the SART task. In what follows, I'm just going to show a few preliminary findings that we have for the mind blanking probes. So what did we find? As perhaps expected, we saw that mind blanking can refer to a bunch of different experiences. So we had reports where people described their experience of mind blanking as an actual jump forward in time, losing a little bit of time, having a little gap in their memory. There are reports where the experience sort of seems to be there, but seems to be devoid of all content. So participants describe experiencing an absence or a void. And then there's another sort potentially of mind blanking that could be described as ongoing visual experience, but with reduced content. So some participants described sort of engaging with the task by recognizing the visual experience, but without taking in what's there. So sort of mindlessly looking, disengaging. We have reports that say, I'm not really processing. I'm like a camera that's always on, but nothing comes in. So this seems to be a quite frequent experience that participants choose to report as a mind blank, but is quite different from the previous two types that I pointed to here. Finally, there's also various reports where people, upon being interviewed, say that there actually was something in their experience now that they're being actually asked about it. And there are also instances where people do seem to genuinely mind blank, but the mind blank is too short for it to be categorized as such. So these were just some of the preliminary directions that we saw in our mind blanking reports. And in interest of time, we're going to save the discussion for later at the end of the presentation. And now I'm going to jump straight to a very different study, the study of the experience of cessation in meditation. So you heard a lot about cessation in the excellent keynote that we had this morning. So I don't have to repeat all of that. Cessation, just to repeat a very brief part of it, can be defined as the absence of all experience and consciousness with no retrospective awareness of anything having taken place during this absence. And as you also heard this morning, there's a new sort of interest in studying this phenomenon, which is not only underexplored in itself scientifically, but also is very exciting for the neuroscience of consciousness. And as mind blanking, it also hasn't yet been systematically phenomenologically explored. So in our research design, our research design relied on 6 so far 90-minute long interviews with an advanced meditator who is the same participant that we heard about in this morning's keynote. So this advanced meditator in this case was not measured physiologically. So this is for the time being a purely phenomenological study that I'm showing you here. But he engaged in interviews about his most recent meditation experience that he had just before the interview each time, which gave us an opportunity to also see how these meditation experiences converge and where they might differ from one instance to the other. The focus of each of the interviews was, first of all, the entire meditation process, and then secondly, a specific subphase or several specific subphases of interest that we got to explore in more detail. And between the interviews, the previous interview was always analyzed to then inform the way that the next interview was conducted. So to now show you just a glimpse of our findings so far, here is the overall diachronic structure with different isolated phases or macro phases of experience that I'm not going to have time to go into, but just to mention, the meditator uses 2 different meditation practices that can bring him to this state of entering cessation. And then after the cessation period, which can vary, as we heard earlier, it can sometimes last for days. In our cases of our 6 experiences, it lasted from 5 to 60 minutes. After this period, the meditator emerges from the cessation state and experiences various interesting post-cessation phenomena. So here we're going to focus just on the few minutes and then on the few seconds, so a few minutes before the cessation state and then a few seconds after the cessation state, which are most interesting for minimal phenomenal experience, and importantly, which the meditator himself defined both of them as minimal phenomenal experiences according to his understanding of this phenomenon. So, starting with the process of entering cessation, and I should warn you, there's going to be a lot of text on these slides. You're not meant to read it all. I'm just going to quickly walk you through the main things that happen here. So the meditator starts after he disengages from all sorts of aspects of his experience in a sort of a boundless space of bare awareness. So in this space, there is some color, there is darkness, what he calls a dazzling darkness with different visual shimmery, glimmery experiences. There's a state of complete equanimity, so very affectively neutral. And there's a sense of overall relaxation. Importantly, there's no mental movement or no mental activity. So up until this point, the meditator has engaged in various shifts, intentional shifts of his awareness, but here he's just present with whatever is going on, and not much is going on at this stage. So then the first thing that happens is that the sensations of the outside world, maybe the sense of the air conditioner or the sounds in the background, dial down and become muffled. Then there's an experience of a physical movement of his head. So his head drops down. And at that moment, there's a start of a sinking feeling. So there's a sensation of floating down. He says it's like us being in an elevator or an escalator. And importantly, all of these events start on their own. So he says, I don't have to do anything. Everything happens on its own. I'm not even waiting. There's no expectation. There's just a total being with this experience. And then the very last thing that happens just before the cessation phase is that the sinking feeling that's pulling him or floating him vertically down transforms into a leaning forward. So there's a sensation of being pulled forward into a sort of a magnetic, endless point. And that's accompanied by a sort of a collapse or a shrinkage of the entire field. So that's not only the visual experience, but the entire experience of space, and everything that's there feels, as he says, as going into some kind of a portal. So the space, the attention, the awareness, everything's being pulled in. And there's an awareness that the mind is inclining towards something, but actually that something is never reached. So the last memory is one of going into this ever shrinking point, and then nothing. So what happens after he emerges from the cessation state? Importantly, there's no memory of the cessation state. There is no sense of there having been a gap. Just the last thing that is there in the memory upon emerging from the entire meditation process is the memory of going into this endless point. After he comes out of cessation, the first experience is the awareness of awareness. We're struggling, as we should, when putting words into these very non-verbalizable states. There's a switching on of what he feels is a fundamental, static, unchanging awareness. And we went to great lengths to try to, put concepts that he would usually be using for describing his experience aside and break it down into like the most possible, the most boring possible words, like static, stuff like that. So this is what we arrived at so far. There's a sense of knowing, there's a perception of darkness and an understanding, but it was very difficult to break down these experiences any further. There's no other quality to this awareness, but there is a color. It's not a visual experience, but then retrospectively, he can ascribe it a color, which is a very jet black color with some blue in there. And then, as mentioned, it feels fundamental. So it both feels familiar as if it's always been there, and then in the later stages of the meditation, it remains there. So there's this aspect of experience that remains present throughout the next phases where other stuff is then being added on. No experience of body, time, space, nothing really visual, nothing sensory, nothing like that. The next thing that happens after this blip, so this is like a micro moment of awareness, is an experience of glimmers of light. So there is no experience of space yet here, but there is just a one-dimensional visual experience of shimmering in a creamy white color. No depth of space, no other sensation. Everything is still completely effectively neutral. Obviously, no thoughts or anything like that. And then after 0.5 seconds, that's like the best estimate that he could put on it, there's a sort of a fading out of these glimmers into revealing this all-pervasive light that's filling up a boundless, infinite space. So the experience of space emerges at this point. No experience of body yet. But what happens at the same time with the emergence of space or a sense of space is this very strong, very fast rush of energy that feels like a fountain. And even though there's no bodily experience, he is able to describe it very precisely, the diameter of the fountain and where it spreads out and all of that. So there's this rush of energy and joy coming up, which then in the next second transforms into a sense of a total release. So we have joy coming up and then a total release. Oh, okay, I have to speed up. A total release and relief and relaxation. Importantly, all of this is happening in this boundless, all-pervasive light space. And together with the sense of total release, some interesting visual stuff starts going on, an experience of concentric circles, an experience of translucent frames rolling towards the distance. So very specific visual stuff that seemed to be replicated in all the experiences that we looked at. But I'm not sure if he ever described it before. So now I have to jump from this to the discussion that's going to be a little bit rushed, but just bear with me for a few more seconds. So the question guiding this presentation was, can microphenomenology be useful in providing descriptions of these states? I only showed you very preliminary findings today, and there's a lot more to be done in these two studies, but I would say that the answer seems to be affirmative for now. So for mind blanking specifically, we saw that the interviews that we did so far were able to point to different subtypes that still need to be corroborated, but it's an indicator of mind blanking. And this sort of work can guide operationalization for future research in this area. For cessation, the interviews that we did so far revealed quite complex temporal dynamics and structural features of these states and processes, which importantly, some of them hadn't been noticed by the meditator prior to the interview series, which raises all sorts of interesting epistemological questions as well here. Then I'm just going to jump through the limitations. Obviously, we're sort of depending on trusting the subjects in the case of using microphenomenology, especially when it's not triangulated by physiological measures, for instance. So there's some opportunity there to maybe work with that. And in the case of exploring stuff like mind blanking, which is a pretty unremarkable experience that we really need to catch as soon as it happens, it seems that the quality of descriptions really depends on the participant's skill in observing and describing experience. Finally, there's the question that I mentioned before of whether this sort of research is making people only notice new aspects of their experience or whether it has a more constructive feature. So that's something that we can discuss if we have time right now. And finally, just to conclude, the question of whether mind blanking and cessations are good candidates for minimal phenomenal experience. As we saw, more work needs to be done on both sides. With mind blanking, one important question to address and thing to distinguish would be what is actually the thing that is blanking during mind blanking? Is it thought, the content of thought? Is it attention, experience, recall, verbal reportability? These are options that might be co-present or present in different subtypes of mind blanking, but there needs to be systematic investigation done on that. And then with cessation, we saw that one pretty exciting way to go forward could be to compare different MPE-like states in the vicinity of cessation. So we have the going into cessation and going out of cessation, which both meet the official MPE criteria from what I saw so far, but that are phenomenologically very different and also temporally quite complex. And with that, I'm going to thank you for your attention and thank my wonderful collaborators as well.